Hello, LinkedIn folks. We are so excited to be here. This is our July episode of Biz Therapy, and I'm here with my professional friend, Lisa Shepard, who's going to introduce herself in a minute. But we are here talking about entry into the U.S. market, and this is but Lisa and I were just chatting and we're going to peek behind our conversations. But this is for any businesses, founders, entrepreneurs that are looking to enter the US market. As Lisa was just talking to me about, it's not that easy, because if it was this easy, everybody would do it. And so we want to peek behind the curtain and give some tips and strategies and kind of information that we hear all the time about what can you avoid pitfalls and what can you think about and arm yourself with. So super excited to have Lisa here. We actually met through the VMT. Shout out to Bob Nelson and the VMT. And we've been talking for probably about a year or two now, Lisa.
Yeah.
So pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And she is boots on the ground in the UK. So introduce yourself, tell us about your company, and tell us.
Thank you so much, Stacey, and thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm super excited to be doing this and have this opportunity. Yes, I'm Lisa Shepard. I am the founder of Altusworks. We work with British and European and really anyone that's looking to expand their business into the United States. And I'll go into a little bit more about what we do probably later in the show. But I have been in Miami, Florida for 7.5 years, originally from London. And I am in London today, which is very wet and cold.
So typical summer.
Yeah,
super lovely. Excited. I actually worked at the Mail. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I worked at the Mail for the Daily Mail for 4.5 years. And I was the second or third go around of the team that helped launch the Daily Mail in the US. And now it's become
huge
success in the United States. But
yes.
when I was in an office in Soho, in New York City, no one knew about us. They actually thought we were an email newsletter. No one wanted to talk to us. And we ended up closing business in Procter & Gamble, General Mills, and like every sort of major brand. But I was part of that team that really struggled on the streets to get us to be more of a household name. And I know it's not easy to do. So tell me, Lisa, where do you want to start with why is it not easy to do?
I think, you're absolutely right. We were talking about it earlier that typically a lot of founders and business owners think, you know what, US is such a huge market. It's such a big opportunity. 100%. It absolutely is. And so much to offer to small businesses and medium-sized businesses. But a lot of people think, you know what, maybe what I'll do is I'll just hire somebody. I'll hire a salesperson and that'll be like the quickest and easiest thing to do. But if it were that quick and easy, everyone would do it. So I think where, we see typically a lot of businesses fail in the US is have that approach with no plan or strategy or go-to-market plan. And, you end up spending a lot of money on someone that ultimately hasn't got the tools or resources to be able to take it to the next level. So that's really where we come in, is to really help with that sort of execution of the go-to-market plan, and make sure it's the right thing to do, because as much as there's big opportunities in the US, it might not be for you, right? Just because it's there doesn't mean to say it's right for your business and your product or service. So that's also something to think about as well. And probably with the Daily Mail at that time, my gosh, it was just, there was no brand. You're starting, you're essentially a startup. And I think that's what people forget.
Yeah, we totally felt that. We hired a CRO, we hired a head of sales, and there was about 3 of us at the beginning that were sellers and about 1 or 2 marketers and a small operations team. But in the UK, when I went to their office, it was a massive operation.
Right.
So I'm going to throw out this first question. Like cultural differences, I can share some of my boardroom war stories, but I would like to hear from you.
Yeah.
Just culturally, give some top, 3 tips of like, hey, this is different, that's different, or stuff that you hear all the time. I will say there's a lot of cursing in the boardroom and there was a lot of drinking.
Yes, that absolutely is the case. I'll give quite a good example, a personal example. So the first ever American company I worked for, I was interviewing in the UK in London, but had to then have an interview with the global head of HR in Denver. And before I got on the call, the head of HR in the UK said to me, just to give you some advice, just be super excited about everything. Just be very excited and very happy to be there. I was like, wow, okay, I'll do that. And so it kind of gives you a bit of an understanding of, we are as a nation, typically the British specifically, quite reserved and just very to the point and get on with things.
Yes, transparent and direct.
Exactly, but in a polite, kind of too polite way sometimes. So I think the US is so welcoming generally and very very open and wanting to help people and help your business, but you have to talk to people and you have to be open to talking to lots of different people. And yes, you need to be enthusiastic, right? You can't have that very British, everything is dreadful approach, right? Yes, we can talk about between ourselves, we always moan about the weather. That's the starting of every conversation we will ever have with anybody. That's just who we are. We're obsessed. But when you come to the States, there is a sort of a culture of being very positive. And that even, and you probably have seen it, that even comes down to like pitch decks, right? So, if you're trying to raise money from VCs in Europe versus the US, your numbers will be different in comparison because it's more conservative on this side of the pond. Over there, it's more risk taking. In the US, it is all about the risk. What is the real opportunity here? Sky's the limit. So I think that's something to really think about when you're coming to the US, whether you're looking to raise capital or you're looking to build a network, is being open to different ways of working and networking. Another good one is when you go to networking events in the UK, everyone's kind of, not always, but fairly siloed. You stick with who you know. And in the US, it's very much like, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you, right? And it's not rude to say to someone, when you're trying to get out of a conversation, we find it really hard in England.
Yes.
We have this innate kind of like, oh, I don't want to be rude. But in the US, it's like super interesting to talk to you. I'm just going to go and meet some other people. And that's great because that's what you're there to do, right? And so I think it's being comfortable with that. And that's, that doesn't always come naturally to everybody. I don't know how you were, like what your experience was apart from the drinking.
No, I feel like I think when you talk about pitch deck, so I think one of our challenges early on was our marketing team was writing us pitch decks and proposals out of the UK. And I think one of our early on challenges was the language, the way that you guys talk in, I'll say British English versus where American English. Words are spelled differently, same words. You use different phrases of how you talk about things. And
yes,
it didn't a media agency in New York City, like MediaVest, that was like one of the biggest agencies. Like if we went in with the exact deck that was shipped to us from the marketing team in the UK, it would like totally fall flat. So we had to take it, rewrite it, even change the imagery at the end of the day, because the Mail had a US site, the Mail had a UK site. And when we first started, we didn't have anything. So we would just show screenshots of the UK site. But the coverage is different. The celebrities are different. The stories are different. There's the president, there's a monarch, like everything's so different. And so I feel like we had to make it very hyper local and hyper relevant to whether we're talking to people in New York or Chicago or LA. And eventually it got there, but it was a real struggle in the beginning.
And I think that's the other thing, when founders or business owners are bringing services or, products to the US market, what works in their home market isn't necessarily going to work in the US market. And you need to do your research and testing before you launch anything, because that could be disastrous. And I think that's something that people, again, because maybe they have a super successful business in their home country or, across Europe, there's an assumption that what works there is for sure going to work in the US. And it doesn't work like that. I wish it did, but it really doesn't. So I think it's, not just, culturally, what do your end users want from that specific product or service in the US, and then tailor it to that market. And it sounds like, yeah, of course you would, but so many people don't, right? And and you need to invest in these things. Again, it's you need to have the funding, you need to have the money to come to the US. You really just can't do it on a shoestring. That's the other thing, it's having the budget, having the cash to be able to really invest. If you really want to make the US work, then either you're funding it from your current business, or you're getting external money to launch into the US, but make sure you have it. So the cultural differences. I mean, I find I've been there 7.5 years, and people sometimes don't understand me and what I'm saying, and I still have that issue. And my dad's been in the US for 20 years, and he still has that. But the benefit is the accent is a real huge benefit, right? Americans love our accent. And it really helps from the business standpoint to have that. I don't know what it is about the British accent. You could probably say it better than I, but there's like a trust, or I don't know, calmness. This is what I've been told. I don't know. Right.
I would say it's very authoritative. And if I'm in a room, because I worked with British folks for so long, it's so obvious to me when people are from like the UK. And when we had an office in Ireland too, and so that was obvious. And I would say what you said is so important. You can't just lift what you're doing in the UK or even in Europe and then shift it to the US and just assume that's going to work. For us, the Mail was like 100-year-old publishing company that had ties to the dating back to like the monarch, and the owners are like lords. Like that doesn't actually mean that much in the US. No. When there's a president and we have elections every 4 years and there's multiple parties and everything changes. And so I think the hockey stick, or even this kind of growth, they were expecting, because they were in year 10, 20, 30, 40, 100. It's just totally different. We were literally a startup backed by a really good financial company, to the point where we did have boots on the ground in sales, but we had to hire someone for PR. We had to do tons of press to get our editors quoted. These were famous journalists in the UK that no one knew in the US.
Exactly.
Became a household name. And we also did billboards at the end of the day, which if you were in the UK for like the male to do billboards about themselves, it's like laughable. But in the US, we bought billboards all over New York, Chicago, Beverly Hills, like everywhere to be like, we're here to say, and we had a catchy tagline. But it took a lot of money to make it pop. And it's been here
Exactly.
for a decade now, and they have a TV show and it's done really well. But it wasn't the case when I started.
No. And I hear that so often. I think, everything comes back down to understanding your market and doing the research and understanding what is your opportunity and starting small as well. I have a lot of, clients who say, we want to be in Florida and we want to be in California and we want to be like all over the East Coast. I'm like, okay, well, let's start in one place and then and then just grow from there, right? Because again, just it can't, it's too much and you'll spread yourself too thin and you'll spend a fortune without actually getting any traction in one particular place. So yeah, I think that's super important as well.
Yeah. And I will say, I'll just start with this one. The pricing and the offering, first of all, it was pound sterling versus US. So that's a huge difference. I do a lot of revenue forecasting and pipelines. Like the UK did pound sterling, we did US dollars. The currency is constantly changing. We had to develop are we going to look at the currency monthly, daily? Like there's a lot of business decisions that go into having multiple currencies throughout your business. Probably folks in Europe are more used to that, but I think people in the US aren't used to that. And then everything we offered in the UK didn't translate. So we had to redevelop our whole product offering based on what the ad agencies and the consumers wanted at the end of the day. So talk to us about that, because it's research and it was having lots of conversations, and we had to redevelop all of our pricing and packages at the end of the day.
Yeah. I again, the US market in some areas, the margins are much higher, right? So you can charge more potentially in the US than maybe you can charge in the UK. People are probably more willing to spend more on services than they are historically in Europe. And so that's to have that understanding is key before you enter the market, so you can understand, okay, what is our opportunity and then what does the growth look like? So absolutely, doing your research. I keep saying this, I feel like I'm going to be a broken record, but the research is key. Understanding who your competitors are, what they offer, how much do they charge, and it's not about undercutting, it's about what are the services that you're providing compared to what they're providing for the money. So I think again, it's just super important to have all of that knowledge at your fingertips before creating, your structure and your sales processes, and as having all of that information to hand. And you can tweak it and you can change it and you can amend it, but yes, absolutely, it's going to be different. And I would probably say 8 times out of 10 you're probably able to charge a little bit more in the US than you are in Europe, which is very enticing, absolutely. And so the opportunity is there.
Yeah. So we both, I would say, do sort of broad strokes, like go-to-market strategy at the end of the day, but you keep talking about do your research. Talk to founders that don't even know what that is, because I do believe that hiring that salesperson, building a whole around that person, it's a failed strategy at the end of the day. There needs to be planning and strategy around what even a launch looks like. And then after you launch, that kind of enters you into a different phase of the business too, once you're actually in the US market. So talk to me about what you would do at a high level and how you would kind of help a company even understand what components they need to develop a go-to-market strategy.
Absolutely. I mean, look, you can either work with an organization such as ours to understand the market and the competitors, right? Those are the two things. What is your market opportunity in the United States? Who, are your potential customers? And then who are your competitors? What do they offer? Those are the two things that we often start with. And then from that, we create a go-to-market strategy with the client. So, okay, so this is what the data is telling us. It's telling us that, the West Coast, as an example, seems to have the biggest market for you. So how are we going to attack the West Coast? What's going to be our plan of action? What's going to be our sales and marketing tools that we're going to use to get out there? What are the events that we're going to go to? How are we going to build the brand? What resources will you need to do that? Are those things that we can provide? Are those things that you're going to provide? And so it's a real partnership in terms of really putting that together, but it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't, it's a good 6 months of planning to get that in place, definitely at least 6 months. And then maybe you might want to test the market. So you might want to say, okay, you know what, let's give it 5 months, partnering with, say, Altus Works or whoever, to test that market, to see what is that opportunity really there? What is the potential revenue opportunity? And then after that, okay, then at that point, what are we going to invest in terms of boots on the ground in the United States? And by which time you've created a bit of traction, some revenue, and so you can justify, investing in some people that are going to be additional to your team, or moving people, which is often what, more often it's the COO, CEO. Probably that's the reason why I want to expand in the US. Someone wants to move there. And then investing in that move, and then starting to build a team around them. But I would also say what's key is when you're, definitely it's always good to have someone from the business over in the States, especially to begin with, but then hire a local team, hire local talent that really knows the people in the market, and who can really get you into that space. Don't bring a whole team over. And also, if you're British or French or German or whoever, don't just hire a bunch of Brits that happen to be there, because I see that a lot. Yeah, because it's great, to have that similar dynamic, but you can't recreate that dynamic that you have in your home country, because you're not going to attract customers that way. That's not who your end customer is. So again, you need to, as you would have done in the country you're in, you need to hire people, a diverse group of people that are going to be able to attract the right type of customers and be able to deliver to those customers. So that's also key. It's good to have the mix, and especially somewhere like South Florida, where it's so culturally diverse. You need to have that in your team, which so important.
Yeah, I think we were part of the team that was mostly Americans, but they did bring over some British folks, some of their sellers, some of their journalists. But I think where that first team failed, and it was before my time, was they did bring over almost like a full British team, and they didn't get enough traction in the market at the end of the day. So I think majority people being local to whatever market, let's just take Miami for example, and then some key stakeholders or C-suites that probably have interest in moving out of the UK or wherever in Europe to the States would be good. So I think you have the historic intrinsic knowledge of what the brand is doing and how powerful it is across the pond. And then you have people hyper local that are I know this person, I know the president of this company, I know someone exactly that can help us get on a panel. That is going to be a huge shift to get you in the door.
So important. I mean, I spent time in Asia, so 10 12 years ago, I was an expat in Malaysia, and I set up a talent team there. But the idea was, I replicated something that was similar to Europe, but that worked for Asia, but hired obviously everyone local, and traveled around and got to know, culturally how it works in Asia. And then, of course, I have my team. And then after 2 years, you hire, a local to do the job. And that, in that situation, was perfect. And it was a great experience for me. So if you have people on your team in your home country, to give them that exposure and that growth and that development, absolutely send them over to the US, give them that experience. It's amazing. Like, I personally, think it's fabulous to go and live in another country, and maybe they might decide to stay. Maybe they'll go, okay, that was great, but I want to go back to the UK for whatever reason, or to wherever they've traveled from, or they want to go somewhere else, right? So I think there's big opportunities there.
Yeah, that is the gift. Talk to us about some common pitfalls. I assume you talk to people every day that has, I'll say, these preconceived notions of, oh, we're going to enter the US market and it's going to be so great. Give us some pitfalls that you just hear people tell you all the time.
Apart from just hiring a salesperson, which is the number one, 100%, like that's number one that I hear. The second is, which I think you can do to a point, and it does depend on the industry that you're in. But I'm gonna sell from the UK.
Oh yeah, love that one.
I'm just gonna use LinkedIn. I'm gonna just sell from the UK, and you know what? You can definitely start to get traction that way, but you are likely to hit a wall, because at some point people are going to go, who are these people? They're not even here, and I want to meet them, and I don't know if I trust this organization or this brand, or I've never heard of them, and then and so it's when I've had that conversation a few times. So you know what, we're just gonna do it from here. I'm like, okay, and then it's like, maybe a few months later, can you help us out? I'm like, sure, absolutely. I'll take, I don't mind. I mean, sometimes you need to try it to see it for yourself before,
experimenting.
Yeah, and I get it. I totally get it. And you can do both, right? You can test the market from the UK, but at the same time start to build your brand locally in the US. And so I think there's a bit of both, but just thinking you can do it solely from the UK. And yet, look, in the recruitment industry, that's very typical, because it's much easier. You're the type of business that you're working in, people are used to that, right? Working with recruiters in other countries. So I think that is good up until a point, but again, you will reach a point where you're like, you know what, now we probably need to think about what we're going to do to grow the business in the US, because you will only get so far. So I think that's definitely one. And the other one is, hiring a whole team of Brits. I'm just going to send over a whole team. Yeah, no, that's not going to help either.
We experience, it's funny you say this, because I think we've experienced through my 4.5 years, every one of these. The full British team didn't work. Selling from the UK didn't work, because we're selling into media companies. They want to go for lunch. They want to go for coffee. They want to go for dinner. It's like, hey, let's meet you on a Tuesday. And if you're in the UK, are you really flying over for like one coffee? Probably not. So then we would have to line up 3 days of meeting for certain executives. And those ended up getting canceled and shifted around too. So 3 days of meetings became one, and then was like the trip even worth it? And so there was always a lot of pressure on us as the sellers to not only set up the meetings, but hope that the meetings actually happened at the end of the day.
Time kills the deal, right? As we always say. So to have some presence there, whatever it is, whether it's an organization like ours or whoever it is, to be able to be your extension of your business whilst you're going through that, sort of growth phase is really important and really supports that growth.
Yes. And then I'll ask this next question, but I will preface that Lisa and I are not lawyers at the end of the day, so we cannot give any legal advice. But
no,
I know there was a lot of regulation and compliance issues with entering into the US market. We had a law firm that was US based that helped us come into the US market. We are not lawyers, but at least you can share some advice on what you're thinking here.
I think it was made easier last year. There was a new legislation where sort of data trade between the UK and the US was less restrictive now. So if you have a UK platform and you want to launch it in the US, there's very little that you need to do. You don't have to have a separate platform for the US, which is huge, right? That is a massive. That's a massive thing that has meant that a lot of businesses have saved a lot of money in the back end development of their platforms and services or whatever it is. So that's one thing which is great. But yes, I mean, again, you are dealing with 50 odd different countries who have different tax laws, who, in some places it's easier to sell cross-border depending on the software and the services and whatever it is that you're selling. If it's a physical product, then obviously that's different once again. So getting really good advice before you do it is super important. Where do you, incorporate? Do you incorporate in Delaware? Do you do it in Florida? Do you do it in Texas? Again, making those decisions, the right decisions up front, and having the right partner to do that is very important. Spend the money, get the right advice is what I would say, because otherwise it will come back to bite you when the IRS comes after you or whatever it is, right? So I think, being cognizant of the fact that before you even sell anything into the US, get the advice and support first, and then we'll be able to plan and put everything into place, and it's done the right way and structured in the right way to make sure you'll be successful. So a CPA, so an accountant and an attorney. That's good accountant, good attorney.
Yeah, taxes, everything. How do you set up the company? Is it a S corp? Is it an LLC? Like, there's so many things. Is the entity an extension of the business from Europe, or is it its own DBA and its own entity? And like, our bank account's different. There's so much that goes into place, and I think people just run so fast because they're so excited to be in the U.S. market, but then the IRS is gonna go after you, or someone's gonna
exactly
sued, and something happens.
It's very time consuming. It takes time. Now, I think there was new legislation that came in the US at the beginning of the year, which has meant that it can take even longer to incorporate, which I don't think was ever the case before. It could take a couple of weeks. Now it could take at least a couple of months. And so bear that in mind. And, if you want to set up a bank account, you've got to come to the US. I mean, I have to admit, the US banking system is quite antiquated compared to the UK or to Europe. It's really fascinating for me. I was like so shocked when I first got there. I was like, what? And so you physically have to go and open a bank account. If you're the founder or the owner of the business and you're planning to move your family to the US, you are again starting from scratch. From a credit standpoint, you will come, doesn't matter how much money you have, you will start from zero. You won't be able to lease a car, you won't, and there are ways around it, but you've got to be aware of that. That to buy a house with a mortgage, it's these things that people just don't realize when they come to the US, and that you really are starting from scratch. I mean, you come as a brand new driver. I mean, we have a horrible driving test in England, right? It's horrible, so hard. It's so hard. And you come to the States, I had to do another driving test, and it was so easy in Florida. I'm talking about Florida, right? And so, but you start like a new driver, like a teenager, basically. Yep. and again, your insurance is super high, so you kind of can get caught out by these things. But it's some people have friends in here, which I think is very helpful to talk to them before you move. Like, come and do a recce, come and see places, go and look at schools, go and look at, if that's relevant, go and look at locations of where to live. Get a feel for what you want and what's available to you beforehand. And then also get tax advice in your home country before you move to the US. Double taxation, it's all good fun.
Yeah, no, that was huge. I remember we had, it was a UK HR team that then had a US HR team, but that was a big thing when executives would move over the pond with families from all over Europe.
Yeah.
And what kind of visa are they on? Could they even rent a car? Could they even buy a house? How do they even show, like, we're in Manhattan, how can they even lease an apartment?
Right.
You need referrals and you need bank statements, and they even have to be in the US. So how do you even start to show that? A whole conversation.
Exactly. And most of the companies, that we talk to often have very small HR teams, or maybe don't have an HR team, right? And so, don't have that support of when you're moving people over. And there are organizations, we partner with businesses that not just help with the physical move, but also, speak to people about, show them the city and take them around and spend like a whole day with them, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
Which, when I moved to Penang in Malaysia, it would have been great. So, I mean, I had support, don't get me wrong, but nothing like that, right? So, but I did find the wine bar, so I was good.
Regret.
Yeah.
All right. As we wrap up, just so we've talked a lot about what to think about as you expand. Obviously, I think the big takeaway is there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and you can't just drop a pin into Miami and say, I've arrived, Viva Miami, and all this business is going to come to me. There's probably, I would say, a 6 months to a year plus planning to get you there. But now that you're there, now you're here, you're established. Ideally, you have some revenue, some clients. Any tips for kind of how to keep that momentum going, or anything that you see for companies that have successfully made it here? And what are some tips that kind of separate them from the people that don't really make it at the end of the day?
Don't take your eye off the ball is the key thing, right? Just because you're, getting some traction, and maybe you've got a few people now in the US, and maybe you're a founder and you're going back and forth, or your COO is going back and forth, or whoever it is, it keep going, keep growing, keep the focus on the growth, I think, is the key. Don't let them just get on with it in the States. Make sure they feel part of the team, part of the business, and part of the ecosystem. That's key. So I think, very often it's like, oh, I've done it. I'm in the US. All right, I'm just going to go back to London and all is good, right? No, you have to keep, I'm afraid, once you're here, you need to keep going back and forth. You need to keep making them feel that they're important, and that it does continue to grow. That's absolutely the key. And keep networking, or whoever it is that's in the United States, maintain that ecosystem. Keep growing the network, go to new places, go to new networking groups, go to organizations, whatever it is that's relevant to your business, and keep up with it. Because, as you know, once you take your foot off the gas, you're done.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's you've moved to the US and you have someone else look after your home, whatever it is, keep the focus and keep it going.
I love that. All right. As we wrap up this episode, Lisa, how can people find you? How can people get in touch with you? Where should they find you?
I am obviously on LinkedIn, Lisa Shepard, www.altus-works.com. Come to our website. There's a form you can fill out. Email me, lisa@altusworks.com. Call me anytime. I'm always available. As I'm back and forth to the UK probably every 2 to 3 months. So if you're in the UK and you want to meet, I'm typically here quite often. Or if you're coming to the US and you don't know where to start, just reach out. We tend to work with founders initially, pro bono, just making some meetings and making some introductions just to get the process going, because I appreciate, it's an unknown. So if you're planning or you're thinking about it, let us know. And it is a process, right? So come and see it, come and get a feel for it and understand what even if, let's say you come to Miami and Miami is not the place that you want to be, it gives you an understanding of how it works, right? Yep. So I think that would be the best thing.
Take Lisa up on that offer. That's a big one. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being authentic, boots on the ground in the UK and in Miami. I hope to see you soon. And thank you for everyone for joining us on this July edition of Biz Therapy. Have a lovely day.